Today, I'm going to reveal the worst cars ever made in Australia that left drivers absolutely furious and frustrated, from the notorious Leyland P76 with its shocking electrical failures to the unreliable Holden models that couldn't even keep their engines cool in the Aussie heat. These vehicles were absolute nightmares on wheels. But here's the mind-blowing part, and trust me, you won't believe this: the very worst car on our list, the Holden HQ Statesman, was actually used to transport the Governor-General and royal visitors to Australia. Yes, you heard that right. Our most important guests were driven around in one of the most unreliable machines ever built. Shocking, isn't it? Let's dive into these automotive disasters. Number 6. The Leyland P76 1973 to 1975. Imagine a car that was supposed to be an Australian hero, but instead became one of the biggest automotive embarrassments in history. That's the Leyland P76, and boy, do I have stories to tell you about this one. The P76 was created by the British Leyland Company, and Australia was supposed to be its main market. Everyone was excited because it looked modern and spacious, but unfortunately, that excitement didn't last very long. The biggest problem with the Leyland P76 was its absolutely terrible assembly quality. When these cars came off the production line, they were already falling apart. Imagine buying a brand new car and having things break almost immediately. That's what happened to P76 owners. The electrical systems were a nightmare, with faulty wiring causing problems everywhere. Lights would flicker unexpectedly, the dashboard instruments would malfunction, and the car would just refuse to start, sometimes for no apparent reason. One owner told a story about their P76 catching fire due to an electrical fault while they were driving down the highway. Can you imagine how scary that would be? Another serious issue was the fuel system leaks. Some owners reported that gasoline would leak from underneath their cars, which is incredibly dangerous. Nobody wants to drive around in a vehicle that might have fuel dripping onto a hot engine. Because of all these problems, people lost faith in the P76 almost immediately. When owners tried to sell these cars, nobody wanted to buy them, even at very low prices. The resale value crashed so badly that it became a joke among Australian car enthusiasts. Although the P76 was never officially used as a royal or government car, Leyland tried hard to convince the Australian government to use it for official purposes. However, after seeing how unreliable it was, the government wisely decided to stick with other vehicles. The Leyland P76 remains one of Australia's most famous car disasters, and people still laugh about it today. Number 5. The Chrysler by Chrysler CH 1971 to 1973. Moving backwards through time, let's talk about another problematic vehicle, the Chrysler by Chrysler CH. This was a luxury car that was supposed to impress people with its size and power, but it came with its own set of serious problems. First of all, Chrysler didn't have many dealerships or service centers in Australia, which meant finding spare parts was incredibly difficult. Imagine your car breaks down and you can't find the parts you need to fix it. This was a real nightmare for Chrysler owners in remote areas of Australia. If something went wrong, they sometimes had to wait weeks for parts to arrive from overseas. The suspension system of the Chrysler CH was another major headache. These cars were very heavy, and the front suspension simply wasn't strong enough to handle the weight properly. After just a few years of driving, the suspension components would wear out quickly, making the ride bumpy and uncomfortable. Additionally, the V8 engine consumed fuel at an alarming rate during the early 1970s. Fuel was becoming more expensive, and drivers were starting to care more about how much petrol their cars used. The Chrysler CH was absolutely terrible at fuel efficiency, which made it unpopular with everyday Australian drivers. Even though the Chrysler CH had all these problems, it was still used occasionally for government and royal events because of its impressive size and luxurious appearance. However, reliability was always a concern when planning important official trips. Number 4. The Ford LTDP5 1973 to 1976. The Ford LTDP5 was another large American-style car that became popular in Australia during the 1970s, but it had numerous mechanical issues that made owners regret their purchase. One of the most frustrating problems was power steering leaks. The power steering system uses hydraulic fluid to make steering easier, but in many Ford LTDP5 vehicles, this system would leak. Drivers would notice their steering becoming harder to control, which is really dangerous, especially when you need to react quickly on the road. Finding and fixing these leaks often cost a lot of money. Just like the Chrysler, the Ford LTDP5 had a massive V8 engine that guzzled fuel like it was going out of style. Petrol prices were rising, and Australian drivers were becoming increasingly frustrated with cars that couldn't go very far on a tank of fuel. The electrical system also gave owners plenty of trouble. The air conditioning would stop working, the lights would fail mysteriously, and the car's electrical wiring seemed to be constantly causing problems. Despite these issues, the Ford LTDP5 was actually used by the Australian government and royal family for official transportation. Its large, imposing appearance made it seem appropriate for important state occasions, even though underneath all that fancy exterior lurked an unreliable machine. Number 3. The Holden HX Statesman 1976–1977. Now let's talk about the Holden HX Statesman, which was an Australian-made luxury car. Holden was Australia's most famous car manufacturer, and people had high expectations for this vehicle. However, the HX Statesman was affected by new emission control regulations that were introduced to reduce pollution. While these regulations were good for the environment, they made the engines perform poorly. The carburetor, which mixes air and fuel for the engine, wasn't properly adjusted to work with the new emission controls. This caused starting problems and rough idling when the car's engine runs unevenly while standing still. The automatic transmission also had serious issues. Drivers reported that the gearbox would slip, which means the engine would race and the car wouldn't move forward properly. This made driving unpredictable and unsafe. Despite these mechanical problems, the HX Statesman was still used for royal and government purposes because it was made in Australia and represented Australian manufacturing. Number 2. The Holden HJ Statesman 1974–1976. The Holden HJ Statesman came just before the HX model, and unfortunately, it had its own troubles. During the mid-1970s, manufacturing quality at Holden was declining. The cars were being assembled too quickly, without proper quality control, which meant defects weren't caught before the cars left the factory. The braking system was particularly concerning. Because these cars were so large and heavy, the brakes simply weren't powerful enough to stop them reliably. Imagine pressing the brake pedal and the car not stopping as quickly as it should. That's genuinely frightening. The suspension parts also wore out very quickly due to the heavy weight of the vehicle and Australia's rough roads. Even though the HJ Statesman had these serious problems, it was still selected for royal and government use. Officials believed that using Australian-made cars for official business was important for the country's image.
Car number 1, the 1988 Mercedes C-Class head gasket concerns. The 1998 Mercedes C-Class represented a newer generation of Mercedes design, combining modern styling with advanced engineering. However, over time, a significant concern emerged involving head gasket reliability in some vehicles. A head gasket plays a critical role in sealing the engine. If it fails, coolant and oil can mix, potentially causing serious engine damage. Reports from owners and mechanics suggested that head gasket issues appeared in a noticeable number of vehicles, particularly after higher mileage, often beyond 100,000 kilometers. This did not affect every car, but it became common enough to be widely discussed among owners. Repairing a head gasket is a major job, often involving engine disassembly. Costs could be high, leading some owners to carefully weigh whether to repair or replace the vehicle. The situation was made more frustrating by inconsistent outcomes with warranty claims. Some owners received support, while others had to cover the costs themselves. Despite this issue, many C-Class vehicles continued to operate without major engine problems. However, the presence of this concern did impact confidence among some buyers.